an empire that actually ruled Egypt for almost 100 years, an empire that built way more pyramids than Egypt itself, an empire that the ancient Greeks literally called the birthplace of the gods. You've probably never even heard its name, right? Well, today in this explainer, we are diving into the incredible story of Kush. It's the African kingdom that history deliberately tried to erase. Stick around because by the end of our time together, you'll understand exactly why this empire got written out of the story and why it absolutely deserves a spot right next to Rome and Egypt.
Think about that for a second. The ancient Greeks, the people who basically laid the groundwork for Western civilization, looked at this empire with absolute awe, calling it the birthplace of the gods. Yet today, it's basically treated as a historical footnote. How on earth does an entire ancient superpower that ruled Egypt for nearly a century and outbuilt them in pyramids just vanish from our collective memory?
Part 1. The Forgotten Ancient Superpower. To understand this massive historical cover-up, we have to go right back to the beginning. Kush was a powerful kingdom originating in ancient Nubia, which is modern-day Sudan, located just south of Egypt. They started forming way back around 2500 BCE. That means Kush is almost as old as Egypt itself. They weren't just passing through either. The Kushites had their own unique language, their own gods, and a royal family line that lasted for over 1,000 years. With their grand capital cities, first Kerma and later Napata and Merowe, they were a massively wealthy trading hub. We're talking tons of gold, ivory, ebony wood, and incense flowing all across Africa and the Middle East. Part 2. When Kush ruled Egypt.
For centuries, people just naturally assumed Kush was a shadow of Egypt, just a smaller neighbor, maybe a copycat, but that is completely wrong. Egyptian records from 3,500 years ago prove they actually deeply feared Kushite power. And around 730 BCE, that fear became a reality. Egypt was literally falling apart, broken and exhausted from civil war. So a Kushite king named Piye looked north and decided, well, he was going to fix it. He marched his army down the Nile River, and city after city just fell to him. But here's the fascinating part. He wasn't just after land. Ancient writings show Piye actively scolding the Egyptian rulers for fighting each other instead of taking care of their own people. He marched in to bring order.
Well, Piye won, and he crowned himself Pharaoh of Egypt. I really want you to think about that for a second. The kings you picture when you imagine Egyptian pharaohs in all those movies and history textbooks, for nearly an entire century, from roughly 744 to 656 BCE, the real pharaohs were black African kings from Kush. This was the famous 25th dynasty. And they didn't come in and destroy Egyptian culture, they actively protected it. They restored the old, crumbling temples, they brought back religious traditions that had been completely forgotten, and in many ways these Kushite pharaohs literally saved Egyptian civilization from total collapse.
Part 3. The Pyramid Secret.
Now, a civilization this grand obviously leaves a massive physical footprint, but get this, it's a fact that surprises absolutely everyone. When we say pyramids, you instantly think of Egypt, right? Well, check out the real numbers. Egypt has around 130 pyramids. Sudan, the ancient heartland of Kush, has over 200. Let that sink in. Kushite kings and queens built way more pyramids in Egypt, specifically clustered around their magnificent city of Merowe. And they look different too. They have this distinct, sharp-pointed architectural style. They're smaller and way steeper than the wide, smooth slopes of the Egyptian ones. Historians actually think this unique style might stem from ancient Kushite building traditions that existed long before they ever even made contact with Egypt. So, you're probably wondering, why does almost nobody know this astonishing fact? Why isn't this taught in every single middle school? Well, part of the answer is just simple logistics. Far fewer tourists visit Sudan compared to Egypt, and as a result, fewer documentaries get filmed there. Add to that the fact that our standard history textbooks routinely just exclude Nubian history when they cover ancient Africa. The history is hidden away, even though hundreds of monuments are standing right there, plain as day, out in the desert.
Part 4. The Warrior Queens.
It wasn't just kings running this vast empire either. Kush had something Egypt rarely ever had: incredibly powerful ruling queens with real, actual military power. They were called Kandakes. Sometimes you'll see it spelled Candace. And a Kandake was absolutely not just a king's wife sitting quietly in the background. She was a total force of nature. She commanded armies, she made massive political decisions. In fact, if you look at official ancient carvings, Kandakes were drawn the exact same size as the male rulers. In the visual language of ancient art, that is a massive, unmistakable signal of totally equal power.
And that power was put to the absolute ultimate test. Around 25 BCE, Roman forces started pushing into Kushite territory. Big mistake. A fierce, one-eyed warrior Kandaki, often identified as Amanirenas, led the Kushite soldiers directly into battle against the Romans. The fighting went back and forth for years. Eventually, the mighty Roman Empire, the literal superpower that had conquered most of the known world, actually had to negotiate a peace treaty with an African queen instead of just conquering her kingdom outright. Rome backed down, and Kush kept its independence. That story alone deserves a massive Hollywood blockbuster, don't you think? Yet most people have never even heard her name.
Part 5, Erased from History.
So, an empire that defeats Rome, rules Egypt, and builds more pyramids than anyone else. How does a civilization like that just fall completely off the historical map? It's wild. The answer to this mystery actually says far more about the people who wrote our history books than it does about the Kushite Empire itself. There were basically two massive hurdles that hid Kush from the modern world. The first was deliberate racial bias. Back in the 1800s and 1900s, a lot of European historians flat out refused to believe that sub-Saharan Africans could build advanced civilizations. It's infuriating, but when they found Kushite ruins, some of them even invented these ridiculous theories that mysterious outsiders must have built them. They completely ignored all the clear physical evidence. So Egypt became the star of the ancient world, and Kush was downgraded to a mere footnote. The second major hurdle is a massive language problem. The Kushites developed their own unique writing system, known as the Meroitic script. Now, modern experts can actually read the letters out loud, but nobody has fully translated what the words actually mean. Just imagine that for a second. Imagine having thousands of pages from an ancient library and you can sound out every single word flawlessly, but you don't understand a single sentence. It's incredibly frustrating. Until archaeologists finally crack the Meroitic script, huge parts of this history, their personal stories, their laws, their private letters, remain completely locked away, hiding in plain sight right there on the stone walls.
Part 6, Fall and Rediscovery.
Of course, all empires eventually face their end. Kush slowly faded around 350 CE, mostly due to shifting global trade routes, drying environmental resources, and eventually an invasion by a rising kingdom called Aksum from modern-day Ethiopia. It wasn't a sudden collapse, it was a slow sunset. But you really have to look at just how incredibly resilient they were. We always think of the Roman Empire as the ultimate unbeatable ancient power, right? Well, Rome lasted around 500 years as an empire. But Kush? Kush lasted roughly 3,000 years. Counting from its earliest days at Kerma, that is a staggering, continuous span of civilization that absolutely dwarfs Rome. 3,000 years of being a global superpower. And thankfully, with modern scanning technology and deep archaeological digs happening in Sudan right now, we are finally bringing this truth back to the light. We are slowly rediscovering what ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome already knew for a fact. Kush was a true, undisputed ancient superpower. The empire history forgot is finally getting a well-deserved second look. And honestly, the only real question left is why on earth it took us this long to pay attention. So, what do you think? Drop a comment below and let me know which erased empire or forgotten civilization we should investigate in our next explainer. See you next time.